My name is Avery Sullivan, and at 32, I thought I knew everything about my family. My grandmother Marlene has always been my rock, especially when my graphic design business hit rough waters this year. Our monthly family dinners at my parents' house were a tradition I cherished, despite the underlying tension that seemed to follow us like a shadow. None of us could have predicted how one innocent question would rip open decades of secrets. Before I tell you how my entire family fell apart over dinner, let me know where you're watching from. And subscribe to hear more stories about family secrets that can never stay buried. I always knew Grandma Marlene was rich. Not just comfortable, but the kind of wealthy that hits you the second you step into her world. Think sprawling gardens, marble floors, and staff who've been with her since I was toddling around in diapers. My parents, Patricia and Gregory, were a different story. Mom ran a high school office. Dad handled insurance claims, and they were all about clipping coupons, buying generic brands, and preaching about rainy day funds. But whenever Grandma was around, things got weird. Mom's smiles never reached her eyes. Dad got quiet, like he was tiptoeing through a minefield. "You know your grandmother," Mom would mutter after family dinners, her voice sharp as a blade. Always flaunting her generosity like we can't survive without her charity. But Grandma Marlene? She was my hero. She saw me when no one else did. While my parents pushed me towards safe careers like accounting or marketing, she said, "Avery, life's too short to ignore your spark." She bought me my first camera at 13 when I fell in love with photography. She helped pay for art school. When I started my graphic design business after college, she sent me flowers with a note that read, "Go make your mark." And I did. Slowly, painfully building a small but proud agency until the pandemic hit. My biggest client, a fancy hospitality group, dropped me overnight. 60% of my income, poof, gone. I was barely scraping by, juggling rent, groceries, and student loan payments. I didn't tell a soul. Not my parents, not my siblings, not even my best friends. I couldn't handle the "I told you so" about picking a practical degree. The only person I opened up to was Grandma. Not for money, just for her wisdom, her ear. But Grandma, being Grandma, wasn't about to let me drown. "Let me help you until you're back on your feet, darling," she said. "That's what family's for." The next morning, a wire transfer hit my account. I cried, thinking it was a one-time lifeline. I had no idea it was just the start of a storm that would expose the deepest cracks in our family. Things got odd after that. My parents, who'd always griped about money, suddenly seemed flush. Dad rolled up one Sunday in a shiny new SUV, brushing it off with a quick, "great financing deal." Their house, where I grew up, was transformed. New furniture, a remodeled kitchen, a crystal chandelier sparkling over the dining table. Mom laughed it off. "We've been careful for years. We're treating ourselves." I wanted to buy it, but something felt wrong. They were civil servants. Where was this cash coming from? Then came that dinner. A crisp autumn night, my beat-up sedan coughing into their driveway next to Dad's gleaming SUV. The house looked like it belonged in a magazine. Velvet curtains, a fancy espresso machine, wine bottles I'd only seen at swanky restaurants. Everyone was dressed to the nines, like we were dining with royalty. And maybe we were. At 6 sharp, Grandma Marlene swept in. Navy dress, pearls, silver hair perfect like she stepped off the cover of Town and Country. She hugged me first, her warmth wrapping me like a cozy blanket. But I caught it. Mom's jaw clenching, Dad dodging her gaze, my sister Sierra glued to her phone, my brother Brandon already on his second whiskey. The air was heavy, like a storm about to break. Dinner was over the top. Prime rib, truffle mashed potatoes, asparagus with hollandaise, homemade rolls. Mom outdid herself, but her hands shook as she served. Dad fussed over non-existent crumbs. Sierra kept sneaking glances at her phone. Brandon poured a third drink. I thought the tension was in my head, until Grandma spoke. Between bites of tiramisu, she turned to me with that serene smile of hers and said, "Avery, darling, is the $2,000 I send you every month enough? If you ever need more while rebuilding your business, you only need to ask." The spoon froze halfway to my mouth. The table went silent, like someone hit pause on the world. Every eye locked on me. Mom's wide with shock, Dad's narrowing, Sierra's snapping up from her phone, Brandon's glass hitting the table with a thud. 2,000? Mom's voice was a whisper, sharp as glass. Every month? My heart pounded. What money, Grandma? I asked, my voice steady despite the confusion swirling inside me. Grandma's eyes locked on Mom's, her expression turning to stone. Patricia, care to explain why Avery doesn't know about the monthly allowance I've been sending her since she confided in me about her struggles? Mom's laugh was high-pitched, almost panicked. Marlene, it's a misunderstanding. Is it? Grandma cut her off, her voice cold as a Chicago winter. Because my bank statements show I've been sending $2,000 a month to an account you said was Avery's emergency fund. You told me she needed it for medical bills. A chronic condition. My jaw dropped. Medical condition? I'm perfectly healthy. Brandon let out a low whistle, reaching for the whiskey again. Sierra's phone hit the table. You're funding her? She snapped. What about us? We're family too. I didn't ask for anything, I said, my voice shaking as I stared at my parents' pale faces. What's going on? Dad finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Marlene, we can explain. I certainly hope so, Gregory, Grandma said, her tone like steel. Because it looks like you've been taking money meant for your daughter and spending it on yourselves. The silence was deafening. The chandelier above us glittered, mocking the truth that was about to unravel everything I thought I knew about my family. So, what happens when the people you trust most turn out to be hiding secrets this big? Drop your thoughts in the comments and let me know where you're tuning in from. Hit that subscribe button because trust me, this story's just getting started and family secrets like these, they never stay buried for long. The silence after Grandma's question was like a bomb going off. You could have heard a pin drop on that fancy new carpet my parents had no business affording. My spoon froze halfway to my mouth, my heart pounding like a drum. What money? I asked, my voice steady even though panic was clawing at my chest. Grandma's gaze locked on my mom, Patricia, sharp as a blade. Care to explain, Patricia? She said, her voice cold as a Chicago winter. Why Avery doesn't know about the monthly allowance I've been sending her since she told me about her struggles? Mom's laugh was too loud, too shrill, like glass about to shatter. Oh, Mother, it's a misunderstanding. Is it? Grandma cut her off, her tone pure frost. My records show I've been sending $2,000 a month for 5 years to an account you said was Avery's. You told me she needed it for medical expenses. A chronic illness, you claimed. I stared at Mom, my pulse roaring in my ears. You told her I was sick? I hadn't had so much as a sniffle in years. Mom's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping on dry land. Dad, Gregory, suddenly found his dessert plate fascinating, tracing the pattern like it held the secrets of the universe. Grandma turned to me, her voice softening but her eyes still blazing. When you came to me about your business troubles, I upped it to $5,000 a month. I was told it was going straight to you. My breath caught. 5,000. I'd never seen a dime. You've been taking money meant for me? I asked my parents, my voice trembling. For years? Mom's face twisted, bitterness spilling out. You've always been her favorite. She spat, years of resentment pouring like poison. Always getting the praise, the gifts, her precious attention. Why shouldn't we get something too? The room spun, like the floor had dropped out. Dad cleared his throat, barely audible. It wasn't stealing exactly. We're your parents. We supported you your whole life. That money was for her, Grandma said, her voice like steel. Not you. We deserved it, Mom snapped. Do you know how hard it is to raise 3 kids? We poured everything into this family. How much? Grandma's tone could have cut stone. How much did you take? Dad slumped, defeated. About $120,000 over 5 years. I gasped, My legs shaky. That money could have wiped out my student loans, paid my rent, kept my business from teetering on the edge. And when I told you I was struggling, I whispered, looking at Grandma, you increased it to $5,000 a month? She nodded, her face grim. That's another $60,000, I said, the math hitting like a gut punch. So you took $180,000 meant for me? Silence. Thick, suffocating silence. Brandon let out a low whistle, downing his whiskey. Wow, he muttered, the word dripping with disgust. Sierra's phone lay forgotten, her face ghost white. What about us? She whispered, her voice barely there. I turned to my parents. And the trust fund? The one you said didn't exist? Mom stiffened. Grandma's eyes narrowed to slits. You never told her about the education trust, did you? We didn't want the kids getting entitled ideas about family money, Mom said, too fast. The trust was set up to pay Avery's tuition, Grandma said, her voice tight. All three of your trusts were managed by your parents until you turned 25. Then control should have gone to you. Nausea hit me like a wave. I worked 2 jobs through college, I said, my voice breaking. Lived in a shoebox apartment with 4 roommates. Took out loans I'm still paying. For what? Dad looked ashamed, his eyes glued to the table. We made investments that didn't pan out. We were going to tell you. You gambled away my education fund? The words tore out of me. It wasn't gambling, Mom snapped. It was a legitimate business opportunity. And instead of admitting you screwed up, Grandma said unflinching, you let your daughter suffer. Brandon shot to his feet, his face dark. Let me guess. You did the same to my trust? The guilty glance between my parents was all the answer we needed. I've been killing myself at a corporate job I hate to pay off loans. He growled. And you had money set aside for me? Sierra's voice shook, barely audible. Is that why you keep saying my grad program's too expensive? Because my trust is gone too? We were going to replace it, Dad mumbled. We had a plan. I laughed, a bitter, broken sound. What plan? Keep stealing from Grandma until you hit the lottery? It's not stealing. Mom slammed her hand on the table, the crystal glasses jumping. It's family money. Everything we did was for this family. No, I said, my voice steady now, cutting through the chaos. Everything you did was for you. Tears burned my eyes, blurring the room. My parents, the people who'd raised me, cheered at my school plays, taught me to ride a bike, had watched me struggle while pocketing money meant to save me. All while living a lie of chandeliers and SUVs. Grandma stood, her presence commanding the room. Enough. From now on, any financial help I give goes directly to my grandchildren. No exceptions. Mom collapsed into sobs, her face crumpling. Dad buried his head in his hands. Sierra stared at her plate, frozen. Brandon poured another drink, his hands shaking. I couldn't look at them. The betrayal was a weight I couldn't carry. I grabbed my purse and walked out, the house feeling like a hollow shell. A stage set for a family that didn't exist. For the first time, I realized I'd never truly known my parents. Not until that moment. The days that followed were a haze. My phone buzzed nonstop. Mom's tearful voicemails, Dad's desperate texts, their words cycling from defensive, you don't understand the whole story, to pleading, please, we need to talk, to manipulative. After all we've done, you owe us a conversation. I couldn't respond. The hurt was too raw, like a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. On the 3rd day, one message cut through the noise. Grandma Marlene's voice, steady and warm. Avery, whenever you're ready, my door's open. No pressure, just love. Those words broke me open, and I cried like I was a kid again, lost and aching for something solid to hold on to. That night, I drove to her house. She welcomed me with warm lemon cookies and open arms, her sunroom a haven from the storm. There's more, sweetheart, she said, sliding a folder across the table. I've been digging. Inside were bank statements, trust documents, records stretching back a decade. My parents hadn't just stolen from me. They'd taken $50,000 meant for Brandon's house down payment, lied about Sierra needing $30,000 for a fake car accident. And the worst? My student loans. Paid off 3 years ago from my trust. The $500 monthly payments I'd been scraping together? They went straight to my parents' pockets. I'd been paying them. Why? I whispered, tears streaming down my face. Why would they do this to us? Grandma's voice was quiet but steady. They've built their lives on a lie they're too afraid to let go of. A life they thought they deserved, at any cost. The truth burned. They hadn't just stolen money. They'd stolen years of my peace, my dignity, my trust. They'd watched me eat ramen, dodge eviction notices, and stress over every bill, all while sipping wine bought with my sacrifice. Something broke in me that week, but something else started to rebuild. Brandon and I met for dinner the next night, his face etched with exhaustion. They did it to all of us, I said, my voice low. Not just me. I know, he muttered, staring into his drink. And I bet they'd do it again if they hadn't been caught. Sierra showed up at my apartment the next morning, her face pale, clutching a torn envelope, a birthday card from Grandma that never reached her. She sent me a check 3 years ago, she whispered, her voice trembling. Mom said it got lost. Grandma confirmed it was cashed, not by me. By the end of the week, the three of us, Brandon, Sierra, and me, made a pact. We'd confront our parents, not with anger, but with truth. Clear, undeniable truth. Together. Because sometimes family isn't about blood. It's about who chooses to stand by you, who chooses honesty over betrayal, even when it's hard. And we were done letting their lies define us. So, what do you do when the people you trusted most break your world apart? Drop your thoughts below and let me know where you're tuning in from. 3 days after that dinner, I stood on the damp pavement outside my parents' house, the place that used to feel like home but now looked like a stranger's. The rain had stopped, but the air was heavy, reflecting the porch lights in streaks of yellow across the wet driveway. Brandon stood beside me, his jaw tight, hands shoved in his pockets like he was holding himself together. Sierra was on my other side, clutching a worn leather notebook stuffed with bullet points, screenshots, and proof of the lies we'd uncovered. We didn't move right away. We just stood there, staring at the house we once trusted, the weight of what we were about to do pressing down like a storm cloud. I can't believe we have to do this, Sierra whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant hum of traffic. You mean, hold our parents accountable? I asked, my heart pounding but my voice steady. No, she said, her eyes glistening. That it took us this long to see them for who they are. Brandon stayed silent, his face hard as stone. Then he stepped forward and rang the doorbell, the sound cutting through the quiet like a warning shot. The door swung open almost instantly. Dad stood there, smaller than I remembered. Shirt wrinkled, hair a mess, eyes red like he hadn't slept in days. A flicker of hope crossed his face, desperate and fragile, like he thought we were here to fix things. You came, he breathed, his voice shaky. Thank you for giving us a chance. We're not here to talk, I said, calm but firm, like I was anchoring myself against the chaos. We're here to listen, and to tell you what happens next. He stepped aside, his shoulders slumping. Come in. The house smelled like stress, burnt coffee, and sleepless nights. The living room was pristine, but it felt cold, like a showroom nobody lived in. The new furniture, the chandelier, the marble countertops. They weren't symbols of success anymore. They were evidence of theft. Mom was perched on the edge of the couch, hands twisted in her lap, her face pale and lips trembling. She looked up as we walked in, trying for a smile that didn't land. Avery, Brandon, Sierra, she said, like this was just another Sunday dinner. I sat down slowly, my back straight, eyes locked on hers. I didn't return the greeting. Brandon set a manila folder on the coffee table with a deliberate thud. Sierra opened her notebook, pages rustling in the silence. The air felt like it could shatter. "I assume you know why we're here?" I said, my voice cutting through the tension. Mom opened her mouth, then closed it, her eyes darting to Dad. We want to say we're sorry," she stammered, her voice thin. Sierra cut in, her tone soft but unyielding. "You've said sorry before, Mom. We're not here for words. We're here for the truth." Dad nodded, his hands trembling. "You deserve that. The whole truth." "Good," Brandon said, his voice low and sharp. "Start from the beginning." And they did. It spilled out in halting, painful pieces. It started years ago when Grandma Marlene first offered to help me. Mom told her I was sick, a chronic illness that didn't exist. That lie got them $2,000 a month wired to an account they controlled. For 5 years, they pocketed it. When my business tanked during the pandemic and I confided in Grandma, they saw an opening. Mom told her I was hospitalized, drowning in medical bills. They set up a fake emergency fund in my name. Grandma upped the payments to $5,000 a month. Not a cent reached me. "You could have just told me you needed help," I said, my voice steady but my heart breaking. "I would have understood." "We couldn't," Mom said, her voice cracking. "We were ashamed." Brandon scoffed, leaning forward. "Not too ashamed to remodel the kitchen or buy that SUV." "I told myself we'd make it back," Dad said, his eyes fixed on the floor. "That we'd repay every penny." "And the trusts?" I asked, my voice tight. "The ones you said didn't exist?" Dad's face crumpled. "We liquidated them. We thought you were too young to handle that kind of money, that you'd waste it." "You mean you wanted it?" Sierra said, her voice flat but cutting. "No," Mom protested, her eyes welling up. "We needed it. The market crashed. Gregory's retirement took a hit. My raises stopped." "So you stole from your kids?" I said, the words heavy with years of hurt. "You let Brandon work 3 jobs. Let me think I was buried in student loan debt. Told Sierra to quit graduate school. All while you sat on our money." Mom's tears fell freely now, but they didn't move me. "You don't understand," she whispered. "No," I cut in, my voice rising with a fury I hadn't let myself feel until now. "You don't understand. You don't know what it's like to check your bank account and wonder if you can afford groceries. To get calls from loan officers while watching your parents drive a luxury SUV. To feel like you're failing, invisible, in your own family. We know we failed you," Dad said, his voice barely a whisper. "You didn't just fail us," Brandon said, his tone cold. "You betrayed us." The silence that followed was suffocating. I pulled a document from my bag, sliding it across the table. "We've talked to Grandma. All accounts are being transferred out of your control. Permanently." Sierra's voice was steady, her notebook open to a page of neatly written demands. "You'll provide full financial transparency, bank statements, trust records, everything from the last 10 years. No omissions." Brandon's eyes were hard. "And you don't contact Grandma again. Ever. Without us there." Mom sobbed, her hands covering her face. "You're treating us like criminals." "You treated us like opportunities," I said, my voice low but unshakable. "This is accountability." Dad buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. "We'll sign whatever you need," he said quietly. I stood, Brandon and Sierra rising with me. "I don't know what happens next," I admitted, my voice softening but firm. "But we can't heal until you stop pretending this didn't happen." There was no yelling, no slamming doors, just a heavy, hollow stillness. Mom reached out as we turned to leave. "Avery?" I stepped back, my heart aching but resolute. Not yet. Outside, the air was cold and crisp, the damp pavement gleaming under the streetlights. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe. In Brandon's car, we sat in silence, but it wasn't the tense kind we'd carried into the house. It was different, lighter, like we'd set down a weight we'd been lugging for years. We didn't have peace, not yet, but we had power. And we weren't giving it back. As we drove away, I glanced at Sierra, her notebook still clutched tight. And Brandon, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. We'd lost the family we thought we had, but we'd found something else. Each other. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start rebuilding. I don't know if I'll ever forgive my parents. The hurt runs too deep, like a river carved through stone. But standing up to them, facing the truth together with my siblings, felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I didn't know I'd lost. It's messy, it's painful, but it's ours. And for the first time, I feel like I'm writing my own story, not living in the shadow of their lies. 6 months after that dinner, my life was unrecognizable, and so was theirs. While I stepped into a sleek new studio I'd designed myself, greeted by a team that believed in me, my parents stood in line at the community center, clutching forms for emergency utility assistance. Every morning, I brewed coffee by a sunlit window overlooking the Chicago skyline, pouring it into a ceramic mug from a local arts festival. I'd sit on my balcony, reviewing proposals from corporate clients who now chased me. Meanwhile, Patricia and Gregory shared a cramped one-bedroom apartment where the kitchen light flickered like a bad omen, and the AC only worked if you gave it a good kick. This isn't me gloating. It's just the truth. Their world crumbled because they built it on lies. Mine? It was finally taking shape because I chose to build it on something real. After that confrontation, when they signed the affidavits and surrendered control of every account, they thought things might slide back to normal. They thought wrong. We cut them off. Not just from Grandma's money, but from us. Brandon blocked their numbers without a second thought. Sierra muted every text thread. Me? I let their messages pile up, unopened, like ghosts I wasn't ready to face. I wasn't cruel, but I was done. Done carrying their guilt. Done pretending their apologies could fix what they broke. Instead, I poured myself into my work. My design agency didn't just recover, it soared. My calendar overflowed with client meetings, podcast interviews, creative showcases. I spoke at design conferences, landed a TEDx invite, and saw my face on a panel for women who reclaim their narrative. One morning, rushing to catch a flight to a Chicago design summit, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. I stopped dead. The woman staring back wasn't the daughter who once sat quietly while her parents stole her future. She stood taller, dressed sharper, her smile softer but surer. She was everything they tried to dim. They'd underestimated me, and in doing so, they'd forced me to prove who I really was. I'll always be grateful for that, in a strange, bittersweet way. While I grew, their lives shrank. The house they'd poured our stolen money into sold at a loss. Creditors drained their accounts. The foreclosure notice hit the local paper, followed by their bankruptcy filing. Gregory tried to land another insurance job, but word travels fast in a small industry. He ended up stocking shelves at a hardware store, part-time. His pride as battered as the old boxes he moved. Patricia took a cashier job at a thrift shop, the same one I'd donated my old clothes to. Sometimes I wondered if she recognized the blazer she once told me was too expensive for someone like you. The irony wasn't lost on me. Sierra graduated summa cum laude, her cap and gown glowing under the lights of Grandma's estate, where we held a celebration dinner. Brandon raised a glass, his voice thick with emotion. To every lesson that nearly broke us, thank you for showing us who we are. The room erupted in tears and applause. Mom and Dad weren't invited. They found out anyway, through a mutual friend who mentioned it in passing. Gregory sent Brandon a text. Proud of you. Wish we could have been there. Brandon didn't respond. Neither did I when their handwritten holiday card arrived at my condo. Avery, we know we've made mistakes. We're trying. We miss you. Love, Mom and Dad. No real apology, no ownership, just longing for a connection they'd burned to the ground. I didn't reply, not out of spite, but because I had nothing left to give. They'd drained every drop of trust, and now they were sitting in the silence they'd built. I wasn't punishing them. I was protecting me. And me? I was surrounded by abundance. Not just money, though my company grossed its first million that year. I paid off Sierra's final semester as a surprise, watching her face light up with disbelief. I helped Brandon launch a podcast that was already gaining traction, his voice finding a new purpose. I started a foundation to mentor underprivileged design students, giving them the chances I'd fought for. But the real wealth was peace. I slept through the night, no longer waking to the dread of bills I couldn't pay. I laughed without guilt, celebrated wins without wondering who'd resent them. I lived without owing anyone anything. Sunday brunches with Grandma became my sanctuary. Lemon poppy seed muffins, real butter, fresh tea brewed just right. One morning, as the sun poured through her sunroom windows, she looked at me and said, "You know, Avery, I think this is what freedom tastes like." I laughed, tears pricking my eyes, because she was right. This was freedom, not just from their lies, but from the weight of their expectations, their guilt, their control. Nearly a year after that dinner, I saw them again. I was speaking at a community business event, referred by a former client. The room was packed, the energy electric as I shared my journey of rebuilding after betrayal. During the Q&A, I spotted them in the back. They didn't approach, didn't wave, just watched. Mom's eyes glistened with tears. Dad's hands were buried deep in his pockets, his shoulders slumped. Our eyes met, and for a split second I felt it all. Grief for the parents I thought I had. Anger for the years they stole. Memories of a childhood that now felt like a lie. Then, something shifted. The storm inside me stilled. I nodded once, a small acknowledgement, and turned away. That was the moment I knew I didn't need closure. I already had it. It came the day I chose myself. The day I stopped making space for people who only took. They'd lost everything. House, status, us. Maybe one day they'll rebuild something new. Something honest. But it won't include me. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Grandma taught me something that year. Something I carry like a shield. Forgiveness is a gift. Trust is a choice, and boundaries are love wearing armor. I'd armored up, not out of hate, but out of love for the life I was building. I had it all now. My work, my peace, my voice, my power. And none of it was theirs to touch. It was a crisp spring morning in New York when the email landed in my inbox. Subject line, nomination, National Vanguard of Innovation Award. I thought it was spam, until I saw the sender, U.S. Department of Commerce. Someone had submitted a portfolio of my work. The bold creative campaigns I'd led, the scholarships I'd funded, the foundation I'd launched for minority creatives. My name was in the running for a federal award honoring entrepreneurs who'd reshaped their industries while uplifting underserved communities. I read it 3 times, my hands shaking, before the shock melted into a quiet, trembling awe. 2 weeks later, an official invite arrived. I was one of 3 finalists. The ceremony would be in Washington, D.C., with a keynote from the vice president herself. I hadn't applied. I hadn't even known. When I showed the invitation to Grandma Marlene, her hands trembled as she held it, her eyes misting. "Avery," she whispered, "your grandfather would have been so proud." I felt my throat tighten, not just for her words, but for the weight of what they meant. I'd built something bigger than myself, bigger than the pain I'd carried. The event was black tie, held at the National Gallery, the kind of night where cameras flash and headlines are born. Backstage, in a velvet gown the color of deep wine, I felt a shift inside me. Not nerves, just readiness. Like I'd been waiting my whole life for this moment. When they called my name, the room erupted in applause. I walked out, heels clicking on marble, head high, the spotlight warm on my skin. I didn't scan the crowd. I didn't need to. until I saw them. Second row, wedged awkwardly between a councilwoman and a tech exec, were Patricia and Gregory. My breath caught, a sharp pang in my chest. They looked out of place. Dad fussed with a tie that didn't fit right. His suit a size too big. Mom clutched a borrowed purse, her eyes locked on mine, heavy with everything we'd never said. It hit me like a wave. They weren't invited. They'd found a way in, maybe through a connection, maybe sheer desperation. But I didn't flinch. I smiled, not for them, but for me. My speech wasn't fully rehearsed. It came from somewhere deeper, raw, and true. I spoke about legacy, about rebuilding from nothing, about how the greatest victories are born from the quietest betrayals. It's not enough to survive, I told the crowd, my voice steady but alive with fire. You have to reclaim the pen. Rewrite your name on your own terms. The room roared with applause, a standing ovation that felt like it lifted me off the ground. Flashbulbs popped, capturing a moment I'd earned with every tear, every late night, every choice to keep going. At the reception, a line formed. Journalists with questions, CEOs with business cards, students with wide-eyed dreams. I shook hands, smiled, shared pieces of my story. And all the while, I felt them waiting. My parents lingering at the back, watching me shine in a world they no longer belonged to. When the crowd thinned, they stepped forward, hesitant, like they were approaching a stranger. Mom's voice trembled. Avery, we just wanted to say, congratulations. Dad cleared his throat, his eyes darting to the floor. You were incredible up there, truly. Thank you, I said, my smile polite but distant, a shield I'd learned to wear. They stood there, awkward, searching for words. Then Dad's voice dropped to a whisper. Do you think there's any way back for us? I looked at them. The people who'd raised me, who'd stolen from me, who'd nearly broken me. The people who'd lost their house, their savings, their pride, and still carried the weight of their choices. I saw the hope in their eyes, fragile and desperate, but it didn't pull me in. Not anymore. Maybe one day, I said, my voice calm but firm. But I don't live in maybe anymore. They nodded, a quiet acceptance settling over them, like they finally understood what they'd lost. Not just me, but the chance to be part of the life I'd built. As they turned to leave, disappearing into the crowd, a journalist approached, her notebook open. Who were they? She asked, glancing at their retreating figures. I watched them fade, their shoulders slumped, their steps heavy. No one who knows me now, I said, and I meant it. The next day, the headline read, Avery Sullivan, the designer who redefined power. Beneath it, a pull quote from my speech. Family can break you, or remind you how to rebuild. Either way, your story is still yours. That night, back in my hotel room, I stood by the window, the DC skyline glittering below. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who ate ramen to survive, who cried over bills, who believed her parents' lies because she didn't know she deserved better. That girl was still part of me, but she wasn't me anymore. I'd become more than they ever allowed me to be, more than I ever dreamed I could be. My company was thriving, my foundation was changing lives, and my heart? It was full, not of anger, but of purpose. Grandma's words echoed, this is what freedom tastes like. She was right. Freedom wasn't just success or money or applause. It was the quiet certainty that I'd chosen myself, that I'd written my story with my own pen. And no one, not my parents, not their lies, could take that from me. I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive Patricia and Gregory. Some wounds run too deep, like rivers through stone. But I don't carry hate. I carry boundaries, love, and armor, just like Grandma taught me. I have my work, my peace, my siblings, my voice. I have a life that's mine, unshakable and true. And in that, I've become unstoppable. It was a quiet Sunday when I found the letter, tucked away in my inbox like a secret waiting to be uncovered. The subject line was simple: For Avery. The sender? Grandma Marlene. I opened it, expecting her usual warmth, but what I read stopped me cold. My coffee forgotten on the counter. Dear Avery, if you're reading this, the dust has settled. The cameras have faded, the headlines have moved on. But I know you. You're still holding it all together with that quiet strength you've always had, the kind that turns pain into power. I never told you this, but when you were 4, I watched you draw a house in my sunroom, crayons scattered like confetti. It wasn't just any house. Heart-shaped windows, vines curling over the porch, a tree with 3 swings, one for the dreamer, one for the fighter, one for the survivor. I turned to your grandfather and whispered, "She's going to build something bigger than us all." And you did. Her words hit me like a wave, pulling me back to those crayon-strewn days. She went on, confessing her own regrets, how she tried to shield me when my parents leaned too hard, but held back, fearing she'd make it worse. "That was my mistake," she wrote. "I'm sorry." My throat tightened. Grandma apologizing to me? After everything she'd done to lift me up? She shared her own story, one I'd never heard. At my age, she'd dreamed of opening a wellness center for women, but her father shut it down. "Women don't run businesses," he'd said. So she buried that dream under dinner parties and folded linens, carrying the ache in silence. "Until you," she wrote. "Watching you chase your vision let me live a piece of mine." Tears pricked my eyes. I hadn't known I was carrying her dreams too. Then came the bombshell. The lake house, our sanctuary of blueberry jam and sock-sliding kitchen dances, was hers, bought with an inheritance she'd kept hidden. Everyone thought my grandfather purchased it, but no. "That place, that freedom was mine," she wrote, "and I've left it to you. Not just for me, but because I understood what legacy should be. Not control or manipulation, but refuge, resilience, rebirth." She directed me to a box in the old writing desk at the lake house. Inside, she promised, a photo of her and my grandfather at a 1968 protest rally, her in a bold red dress. The original deed to the lake house, signed in her name alone. Her journal, pages of unspoken truths. A letter introducing me to a network of women founders who'd quietly supported each other for decades. "You're one of them now," she wrote. "You just didn't know it." "Avery, my sweet girl," she continued, "forgiveness is a gift, not a requirement. You don't owe your parents your peace. You are the peace. You built it from rubble. I've seen what happens when the women in our family choose silence. And I've seen what happens when they choose voice. You chose your voice. Loud, brave, unapologetic. Whatever you build next, a home, a partnership, a movement, build it like you built yourself, with truth, with fire, with love. I am endlessly proud of you. With all my heart, Grandma Marlene." I sat there, tears streaming, her words wrapping around me like a warm blanket. 3 weeks later, I drove to the lake house. The key slid into the lock with that familiar click, the air still carrying the scent of cedar and lavender. I walked to the desk, my hands trembling as I opened the drawer. There it was, a small wooden box, her handwriting on the envelope. For the girl who turned silence into story. Inside, everything was exactly as she described. The photo showed a young Marlene, fierce in red, standing tall at that rally. The deed, her name in bold ink, a testament to her quiet rebellion. Her journal, filled with dreams she'd buried and truths she'd guarded. And the letter, connecting me to a sisterhood of women who'd been lifting each other up in the shadows. I held them close, crying. Not from pain or grief, but from a love that spanned generations, that didn't need to shout to be heard. A love that simply was. That moment crystallized everything. My parents had tried to silence me, to take my future and rewrite it for themselves. But I'd reclaimed my pen, my story, My power. I'd built $1 million company, funded Sierra's education, helped Brandon find his voice, and launched a foundation to lift up others. I'd stood on a stage in DC, facing Patricia and Gregory, and told them I didn't live in maybe anymore. And now, with Grandma's letter, I understood. I wasn't just carrying my story. I was carrying hers too. Forgiveness? Maybe one day. But trust? That's a choice, and I choose me. I choose the woman who rose from betrayal, who built peace from rubble, who turned silence into a voice that echoes. Grandma taught me that boundaries are love and armor, and I've armored up. Not out of hate, but out of love for the life I've created. A life that's mine, unshakable, and true. So, here's my question to you. What story are you writing? What legacy are you building, even through the pain? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone. If this journey moved you, hit that like button, smash that subscribe, and ring the bell for hidden family revenge stories. We're here to share the quiet truths that roar the loudest, and we've got more stories coming your way. Stay with us, because your voice, it's worth hearing. The lake house was more than a building. It was a heartbeat. Tucked along the shores of Lake Michigan, its weathered cedar walls and wraparound porch held memories of summers spent with Grandma Marlene, stirring blueberry jam and dancing on slick kitchen tiles and mismatched socks. After reading her letter, I knew it was more than a gift. It was a call to action. She'd left it to me not just as a place, but as a purpose. A space to create, to heal, to build something bigger than myself. I drove up on a Saturday morning in early summer, the air thick with the scent of pine and possibility. The key turned in the lock, and the familiar creak of the door felt like a welcome home. Inside, the house was just as I remembered. Sun streaming through wide windows, lavender lingering in the air, the old writing desk where I'd found her box. I set it down on the kitchen table. Photo, deed, journal, letter, and let the weight of her words settle over me. You're one of them now, she'd written, referring to her network of women founders. I wasn't just inheriting a house, I was inheriting a mission. That weekend, I didn't plan. I just lived in the space. I walked the shore, letting the waves lap at my bare feet, cold and grounding. I flipped through Grandma's journal, her elegant script telling stories of a life I'd only glimpsed. Her defiance at that 1968 protest rally, her quiet rebellion against a world that told her to stay small, her love for my grandfather that burned through every page. One entry, dated the year I was born, stopped me cold. Today, I held Avery. She has my mother's eyes, fierce, curious, unbreakable. I pray she never learns to hide them. I cried, not out of sadness, but because I felt her with me, her voice urging me to keep going. By Sunday night, I'd made a decision. The lake house would become a retreat for creatives like me. Women, especially, who'd been told their dreams were too big, too impractical, too much. I'd call it the Marlene Haven, a place for workshops, mentorship, and healing. A place where silence turned into story, just like she'd said. Turning a lake house into a retreat wasn't as simple as hanging a sign. It took months of planning, permits, and more than a few sleepless nights. But I wasn't alone. Sierra, fresh from her summa cum laude graduation, dove in with her organizational genius, drafting schedules and outreach plans. Brandon, now a rising podcast host, used his platform to spread the word, interviewing artists and designers who'd faced their own battles. Even Marta, Grandma's housekeeper of 30 years, insisted on helping, showing up with her famous lemon cookies and a knack for logistics. I reached out to the network of women founders from Grandma's letter. They were a force, CEOs, artists, activists, all in their 60s and 70s, who'd built empires in the shadows of a world that underestimated them. Over Zoom calls and coffee meetups, they shared advice, resources, and stories that echoed Grandma's. One, a retired publisher named Evelyn, told me, "Marlene always said you'd carry the torch." She wasn't wrong. They connected me with donors, architects, and even a grant writer who helped secure funding to renovate the lake house. By fall, the Marlene Haven was taking shape. We added a studio wing with skylights for art workshops, a communal kitchen for late-night brainstorming, and a library filled with books by women who'd defied the odds. The porch became a gathering spot for bonfires and storytelling nights, where creatives shared their journeys, some raw, some triumphant, all real. I poured my own money into it, using profits from my design agency, which was now grossing 7 figures. But it wasn't about the money. It was about creating a space where others could find what I'd fought for: a voice, a purpose, a home. The first workshop was a weekend retreat for young designers from underserved communities. I stood at the front of the studio, watching 20 women, some nervous, some bold, sketch their dreams on blank canvases. One, a 19-year-old named Jada, reminded me of myself at her age. All passion and doubt, afraid her ideas were too big. I sat with her during a break, listening as she talked about growing up in foster care, scraping by on scholarships. "You're here because you're enough," I told her, echoing Grandma's words to me. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." By the end of the weekend, her portfolio was bursting with designs that could rival anything I'd seen in the industry. Brandon and Sierra weren't just my siblings anymore. They were my allies, my anchors. We'd made a pact after confronting our parents, and it held us together through the chaos. Brandon's podcast, Breaking the Silence, was now a hit, blending raw storytelling with interviews about resilience. He'd invited me on as his first guest, and we'd spent an hour unpacking our story, tears, laughter, and all. Listeners flooded the comments with their own tales of family betrayal, proving we weren't alone. Sierra, meanwhile, was thriving in her graduate program, studying social work with a focus on family dynamics. She'd started volunteering at a local youth center, mentoring kids who reminded her of us, caught in cycles they didn't create. One night, over pizza at my condo, she showed me a research proposal she'd written about intergenerational trauma. "This is for us," she said, her eyes fierce. "For every kid who's been lied to by the people they trust most." We didn't talk about our parents often, but when we did, it was raw and real. Brandon admitted he still felt a pang of guilt every time he ignored their texts. Sierra said she'd unmuted their messages but hadn't responded. I was still letting their calls go to voicemail, their words piling up like leaves in a storm. We agreed on one thing. Healing didn't mean forgiving them. It meant choosing ourselves. Every day. One evening at the lake house, we sat on the porch with mugs of tea, the lake shimmering under a full moon. Brandon broke the silence. "Do you think they're sorry?" he asked, his voice low. "I think they're sorry they got caught," Sierra said, her tone sharp but sad. I stared at the water, the ripples catching the moonlight. "I think they're sorry they lost us," I said. "But that's their burden, not ours." We clinked our mugs, a quiet toast to the family we'd become. Not the one we were born into, but the one we'd chosen. A year after the award ceremony, I was at the Marlene Haven, preparing for our first anniversary retreat. The place was buzzing. Volunteers setting up tables, artists arranging displays, the smell of fresh paint mixing with coffee. Jada, now a regular at the Haven, was leading a workshop on digital illustration, her confidence a far cry from the shy girl I'd met months ago. I was in the studio reviewing schedules when Marta tapped my shoulder. "Avery, you have a visitor," she said, her voice soft but wary. I followed her to the porch, my stomach twisting. There, standing by the railing, was Patricia, my mother. She looked older, thinner, her coat too big for her frame. Her eyes, once sharp with resentment, were soft now, almost pleading. "Avery," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know if you'd see me." I crossed my arms, grounding myself. "What are you doing here?" "I heard about the Haven," she said, glancing at the studio wing. "I wanted to see it. To see you." I didn't respond right away. The air was heavy, the lake's gentle waves the only sound. Part of me wanted to send her away, to protect this space from her shadow. But another part, the part Grandma had nurtured, wanted to hear her out. 5 minutes, I said, my voice steady. "Say what you came to say." She nodded, her hands twisting the strap of her purse. I know I don't deserve to be here. I know what we did, Gregory and I, was unforgivable. But I need you to know we're trying to make it right. Not for us. For you. For Brandon and Sierra. I raised an eyebrow. How? We've been going to therapy, she said, her voice shaking. We sold the car, paid back what we could to the trust accounts. It's not much, but it's a start. And I'm working on understanding why I let jealousy control me. Why I hurt my own kids. I studied her, searching for the lie. But all I saw was a woman stripped bare, carrying the weight of her choices. Why now? I asked. Because of you, she said, tears spilling. Seeing you at that award ceremony, hearing your speech, it broke something in me. I saw the woman you became despite us, and I realized we didn't just lose you. We lost ourselves. I felt a pang, grief maybe, for the mother she could have been, but I didn't let it pull me under. I'm glad you're trying, I said. But that's your journey, not mine. I've built this without you. She nodded, wiping her eyes. I know. I just wanted you to know I see you now. And I'm so, so proud. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. She turned to leave, her steps slow, and I watched her disappear down the path. For the first time, I didn't feel anger or pain, just a quiet release. I'd given her my truth, and that was enough. The Marlene Havens' first anniversary retreat was a triumph. Over 100 creatives, women, men, young, old, from every walk of life, gathered for a weekend of workshops, storytelling, and connection. Jada led a session that had everyone in tears, sharing how the Haven had given her a home when she'd never had one. Sierra facilitated a panel on healing through community, her voice steady and wise. Brandon recorded it all for his podcast, his laughter echoing across the lawn. Grandma was there, her silver hair catching the sunlight, her smile brighter than ever. She pulled me aside during the bonfire, her hand warm on mine. This, she said, gesturing to the crowd, is what I meant by legacy. You've given them what I couldn't give myself. I hugged her, tears in my eyes. I learned from the best. That night, as the fire crackled and stories filled the air, I felt it. A sense of wholeness. My parents had tried to break me, but they'd only made me stronger. I'd built a life that was mine, surrounded by people who chose me, who saw me, who stayed. The lake house wasn't just a place anymore. It was a promise kept, a dream realized, a legacy alive. I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive Patricia and Gregory. Some wounds leave scars that never fade. But I don't carry hate. I carry truth, fire, and love, just like Grandma taught me. The Marlene Haven is proof of that. A place where silence becomes story, where pain becomes power, where broken hearts find home. 2 years after that dinner, I stood on the lake house porch, watching the sunrise paint the water gold. My company was thriving, my foundation was changing lives, and my siblings were carving their own paths. Brandon's podcast had landed a major sponsor, and he was planning a national tour. Sierra was halfway through her master's, already making waves with her research. And me? I was no longer the girl who ate ramen to survive. I was Avery Sullivan, the woman who'd turned betrayal into a beacon. I still got messages from my parents, less frequent now, but steady. They were trying, they said, to rebuild. Gregory had started a small woodworking business, selling handcrafted shelves at local markets. Patricia was volunteering at a women's shelter, finding purpose in helping others. I didn't respond, but I read their words. Maybe one day I'd reply. Maybe not. My peace didn't depend on it. The lake house was my anchor, my refuge. I spent weekends there, hosting retreats, mentoring artists, writing my own story. I'd started a memoir, inspired by Grandma's journal, weaving our stories together. It wasn't about revenge or pain. It was about resilience, about choosing yourself when the world tries to choose for you. One morning, as I sat at the desk with Grandma's photo in front of me, I wrote the opening line. This is the story of a girl who turned silence into song, of a family that broke her, and of the legacy that made her whole. It felt right. It felt true. If you're still here, thank you. This journey, mine, Grandma's, my siblings, is more than a story of betrayal and redemption. It's a reminder that your voice, your truth, your fire is yours to claim. The Marlene Haven stands as proof. A place where creatives gather, where dreams are born, where silence becomes a symphony. I see Grandma in every brushstroke, every story shared, every heart that finds its way home. I don't know what's next for me, but I know it'll be built with the same truth and love that got me here. My parents may find their way back to themselves, but my story doesn't wait for them. It moves forward with Brandon and Sierra by my side, with Grandma's legacy in my heart, with every person who walks through the Haven's doors. So I ask you, what's the story you're writing? What legacy are you building, even through the pain? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one and they mean the world. If this story moved you, hit that like button, smash that subscribe, and ring the bell for Hidden Family Revenge Stories. We're here to share the truths that roar, the voices that rise, the stories that stay. Join us for the next chapter, because your story, it's worth telling, and we're here to listen.